So the discussion this morning is around adequacy and getting to the finishing line, and I think that the industry has moved in just too far in the direction of looking at what we do in post-retirement without looking at adequacy in the accumulation phase. There seems to be a view that that's all done and dusted and now we've got these account balances and we need to look at appropriate products in retirement. But the fact is that for the majority of Australians, their account balances when they enter retirement won't buy very much because they're not that large. And I think sometimes we forget that. We forget that because we work in the financial services industry and so we're not representative of the majority of Australians. The stats that come out of different bodies and the modelling Treasury does talks about averages, and Maria and I are going to talk a bit about this, averages don't give you the correct picture. And so if you look at the majority of Australians that many of the funds who come to this conference represent, then their account balances are still quite low. And there's a variety of stats around, and the ABS data is not very recent, let me tell you. But and I'm going to talk about averages because I can't get medians. I like talking in medians, but I can't get a lot of that for some of this information. But the average balance at the moment is $71,000. For men in the age range 60 to 65, it's $102,000, and for women, it's $88,000. Now, for our members at Hester, and as Michael said, over 80% of our members are women. The medians is a lot lower. The average is about $24,000 in our fund, and the median for women in our fund is just over $10,000. So for half of our 750,000 members, they have $10,000 or less in their accounts. And when they come to retirement, some of those account balances obviously are larger, but they are not huge. And if you read the financial press at the moment and you hear some commentary that's coming out of the industry, you would think that everyone is, retiring with at least $500,000, and obviously most of them have got $1 million because we've got this hysteria. Stephen Mayne stole my word yesterday, on Wednesday. This hysteria about, we might think about changing some of the tax arrangements and give people $1 million tax-free, but tax a little bit after that. Our members would just love to have $1 million in their account. So I think we need to come back to reality for what the majority of Australians are experiencing and look at measures still in the accumulation phase so that we can get to the finish line. I think there should be policy work done on post-retirement products and they should be appropriate across the population. But at the minute we are talking about people with high account balances and high income earners, and they don't represent the majority. So I'd just like to reiterate, and people know all these things, but I just want to go through them again, the sorts of things that we should be talking about and that we should be promoting in the accumulation phase. The low income contributions tax rebate that the current government has put into place is a fantastic measure for thousands of Australians. For some of our members, that measure, coupled with the increase in the SG to 12%, will mean a 44% increase in their retirement savings. So I'm talking about a woman working part-time, age 30, a current low account balance, takes time out of the workforce for child-rearing and childbearing, a 44% increase in their retirement savings. This is a really important measure for many, many thousands of Australians. We must remove the $450 a month threshold. We still have people who work quite regularly, so not just now and then, who do not get super. If you are, for example, a casual teacher in some jurisdictions, not in all states, or a nurse, and you are registered, I'll take a nurse. If you're in a nurse bank and you're registered with 2 or 3 or 4 hospitals and you do casual work with those hospitals individually, they are individual employers, and if you don't earn $450 a month from that one employer, you don't get super. So you can have somebody who's working quite regularly who is not eligible for the SG. Now, this happens across a number of industries, and there are some industries more affected than others. But we must remove that $450 a month threshold. The rationale for why it was put there in the first place just should go. And as I say in a lot of forums, I've lobbied a lot of ministers and governments about this, and it's my personal KPI before I leave the industry that that's gone. We must talk more about contribution splitting. We know that women who take time out of the workforce to have their children are severely disadvantaged. Up to $100,000 some people can be by just taking 5 or 6 years out to have their children. Now, if we promote contribution splitting more, and in fact those people who are in coupled relationships, if they have their partner able to split their contributions and put that into the woman's account before she takes that leave, that will have a big impact on her future balance. And putting money in early is obviously a very important thing to do, rather than the catch up later when they're in their 50s. And we don't talk about contribution splitting enough. Some funds don't even offer it. So I think it's something that we can promote much more as an industry, and it will have a greater effect on a vast number of people, and particularly women. We must increase the co-contributions threshold, so that was a great initiative that has been in place for a while. It's been diluted a bit at the moment, but we must get that back up. We must increase the threshold, and we must increase the matching amount. And we also must have a further matching amount, I believe, for women who are on leave to have their children. If they're going to be able to put in voluntary contributions during that time, that should be matched. These are the people who are going to access the age pension the most in the future. If we're looking at reducing reliance on the age pension in the future and spreading the contribution to people's retirement savings, these measures can be put in place now. And that is a measure that could be put in place now, which would assist during that period of leave. Someone said, it was a forum during last year, and someone said the face of poverty in Australia is an 80-year-old woman. And in our fund, we're going to have a lot of women who get to 80, and our goal is that they are not living in poverty. The SG should be paid on all paid parental leave, whether it's the government's paid parental leave or employer parental leave. We need the SG to be paid during that time. We must publicise more the value of advice. Intra-fund advice is absolutely vital for our members. For the majority of the funds here and the members we cover, we should be giving that advice to younger members about the benefit of putting in extra contributions early because of the benefit of compound interest that will grow. And for those of our members reaching retirement or coming, up to retirement, preparing for retirement, then there's a range of options people need to take in relation to their investment options, and they all have personal circumstances, personal financial circumstances, personal family circumstances, and the value of advice during that period is also vital. And I think that it's something that every fund needs to have in place, is a really good advice service that they can give to their members. And my last thing is self-managed super funds. I think there should be a legislated amount where people must have before they go into a self-managed super fund. We see a lot of instances of women with low account balances and who are on lower to middle incomes having money transferred into their partner's self-managed super fund, who don't understand that they have responsibilities as a trustee. Because of longevity risk, they'll probably be the sole trustee of this fund at some point in the future. And is it right that the investment strategy they're going in suits them? It may suit their partner, but it may not suit them. Does it have the insurance coverage that they need, or is it something that suits somebody else in the fund? And I think it's another area, particularly for women, that we need to do a lot more education about. And a legislative amount before people go into a self-managed super fund would help do that. Can I just say in passing that Hester has more money going to our income stream than goes to self-managed super funds. And that's the way we would like to keep it, of course, but that's because we can promote a product that our members can use. We have an account-based income stream, and it's something that suits our member demographic, and members are using it and increasing numbers staying with it. So my main point in this morning is let's keep talking about the accumulation phase and what we need to do in the accumulation phase before we start spending a lot of time and a lot of resources on a very small group in the population, when we start talking a lot about a plethora of products that most of our members are not going to be able to afford. Thank you.
I think there are a number of solutions to closing the gap, and we have covered some of these and talked around these areas over the course of the conference. But obviously, lump sums, or encouraging people to take lump sums, is one solution. Increasing financial advice, working longer, and also at the end of the day, increasing balances. And one of the ways we can do that is by increasing voluntary contributions. I'd actually like to talk about a survey that Franklin Templeton has undertaken, and it's called the RISE survey, Retirement Income Strategies and Expectations. So I think that the RISE survey is much better than a falling survey. We like things to rise, but there were some very interesting insights that came out of that survey. There was the key finding there was that stress about retirement is increasing, but that, and this is, I think, an interesting fact, and that is that it's actually more stressful in the planning stage for retirement than it is actually being stressed when you are retired. So if I look around the room, I think people here probably fall in that age of 45 to 60 years. Apologies to those that might be less than that. But you can be pleased to know that you are probably, or at least according to our survey, the most stressed about retirement now, and that in fact when you are 65 years old, you should be, according to our survey, less stressed. And I think that the age pension actually has a role to play there. But the second finding of the survey was that in response to a lack of savings, 2/3 of participants said that they intended to work longer. Now that is actually a flawed strategy, good for some I think, but that what we actually found was that people had intended to work longer, but that as in fact they aged, they were either unwilling or less able to work longer. So that was a difficulty. I would like to point out, I think there's something that we may kind of brush over, and that is the role of employers in enabling people to work longer. I think that with the move from DB schemes to DC schemes, employers can kind of wipe their hands of all of that, when in fact I think employers do have a responsibility for retraining, for taking on part-time work and really just changing attitudes, I think, to older workers. I think that would be helpful. But the best way, and I think this is not going to come as a great surprise, particularly to the advisors in the room, but the best way to reduce stress about retirement was to seek financial advice. So the understanding of a retirement strategy, our happiness with a retirement strategy and confidence in that strategy actually doubled for those that received financial advice. So I think that we can say that, as an industry and as funds, we're focusing on increasing access to affordable advice. Clearly that's been an objective of government policy through a round of the round of the reviews and reforms that we're having, and that is in fact the right track to be on. So that's really an individual perspective of longevity and retirement. I actually kind of want to cycle up and give you, I'm a fund manager after all, you'd expect me to talk a little bit about investments. So I think there are a number of approaches we can take from an investment perspective. This is not a product focus, but really just talking about a fund's investment strategy. So we have the traditionalists, the 60-40 or 70-30. We're just going to get through that through market volatility with that asset allocation. We've talked a lot in the investment conferences about our high reliance on the performance of equities that leads to. And we know, of course, that the disadvantage of that 60-40 strategy, let's just kind of put our heads down and keep going through, it's a long-term thing we're doing. The disadvantage is that correlations increase between asset classes at times of market volatility, so diversification kind of goes out the door when you actually need it most. And of course the other point is that short-term volatility can be significantly higher than historical averages. So that can really impact on member balances in a way, and I think we've just come through that period in a way that we weren't necessarily expecting or we hadn't really prepared people for. So one of the other investment approaches that people are talking about a bit at the moment is a risk parity approach. So that's really a constant allocation of ex-ante risk between your growth assets and your defensive assets so that both make an equal contribution to total portfolio risk. And that's has been, the back-tested numbers there look quite positive. It reduces your reliance on equities, so if we're worried about our reliance on equities, that can be superficially attractive. But really, I think buyer beware. The back-tested numbers look particularly good at the moment, and they look good because bonds have done well. And we found out from Andreas, I think in plenary session number 3, that we don't necessarily expect that good run from bonds to continue. So a lot of the numbers that you may be presented with a risk parity approach, I think just be be cautious around that. An alternative approach from an asset allocation or portfolio construction perspective is a volatility management overlay, which is an active approach. It means that you can really, keep your 60-40 or your 70-30 mix, but protect your downside. Now, always protection comes with a cost, but given, I think, what we know about people's attitude now to volatility, their response to that, that may be something that we as an industry need to consider. And another, I guess, underlying way to address that, the volatility of portfolio returns and lead to, hopefully get to higher end balances, is to, in fact, in your equity portfolio, to screen out high volatility stocks. So there's just some investment approaches that we, I think, as an industry can consider in order to get to a better outcome and perhaps a better pathway of returns that may, in fact, increase member confidence. But I'd like just to touch very briefly on two disconnects that I think we need to seriously think about. And Anne-Marie mentioned this in her introductory remarks. But we know that averages deceive. So we know whether we're talking about life expectancy or market returns or volatility or member balances. Averages deceive. So for every 50% that are below the average, there's another 50% that are in fact are above the average. So we know that, according to a recent survey, that by 2052, 69% of people will get a 65% replacement rate on their income. But I think we need to be very careful of the remaining 31% that are not going to get anywhere near that. So I think we need to treat the data with some care. The other point to make, and this is really moving from the accumulation phase to the decumulation phase, is that individuals matter. And I think that we have, as an industry, been conditioned to think about scale. We've been conditioned to think about aggregation, low cost. How can we do the best we can for the most people? And My Super, I think, has added to that focus. But retirement is actually about individuals. So when we're thinking about the decumulation phase, we really need to be thinking about customised solutions. What does the individual need? What are their individual circumstances? And that's going to take a technology response, I think, to deliver that kind of, to deliver the outcomes that we need in the decumulation phase. So I think the challenge that we need to focus on is how are we going to, with the number of funds that we have, how are we going to go about efficiently tapping technology to take into account individual circumstances? And I'll leave it there. Thank you.
My view of the finish line, I think, is maybe slightly further down the track than particularly Anne-Marie. I do think it's important that there's policies in place to get people an adequate accumulation at retirement. But my view of the finish line is that this accumulation at retirement should be used to ensure that people have both an adequate but also a secure income in retirement. And that income in retirement is one that should cover people for the risks they're going to face in retirement. And those risks are longevity risks, the risk of living too long, market risk, the risk of being exposed to the share markets, and also inflation risk, which in our current low inflation environment we often forget about. But who knows what government monetary policy is going to be over the next 30, 40 years up to the time of the end of our lives. So I see the finish line a lot further on. And how can we actually get to that finish line? Well, I think it has to be a tripartite sort of agreement to get to that finish line. We have to have buy-in by the government, we have to have buy-in by the industry, but we also have to have buy-in by consumers, or the fund members. Now, if I look at the government has a retirement income policy, but it's always articulated as an accumulation policy. And ever since we had productivity awards superannuation and the superannuation guarantee, and policy changes that have been made by governments of both colours, all of these changes have really focused on the accumulation phase, making sure that we have an adequate accumulation at retirement. So our current government, could be our previous government, but our current government has increased the mandatory contribution rate. It's introduced My Super, which makes sure that disinterested people's superannuation is looked after during the accumulation phase. We have consolidation of accounts. We have tax changes which encourage people at the lower end to contribute more. But there has been very little focus on retirement incomes. We don't really have a retirement income policy. We have a retirement accumulation policy. But I'd really like government to articulate superannuation as a retirement income policy. And when it talks about superannuation, not just talking about how much you're going to have at retirement or what your hypothetical replacement rate might be if we actually had products to give you that, but I'd like governments to actually talk about superannuation as something that's going to get you to the absolute finish line, so that in your very old age you've still got a retirement income that's going to last at least as long as you do, that's going to insure you against fluctuations in the stock market. I think that the Challenger ads have a lot to answer, have a lot to sort of advice to provide us about not needing to be worried about the share market in older age, and also to provide inflation insurance to make sure that our savings don't get eaten away by inflation. So I'd really like to set a challenge to the government to articulate a proper retirement income policy. And that retirement income policy should not just be superannuation, but it should look at the age pension as well. I do appreciate a lot of people have low superannuation balances. And whatever we do, there's always going to be people on low incomes, people in and out of the workforce, and the age pension has a major role to play for those people to provide them with this sort of tool to get to the finish line. But over the years, there's going to be a lot of people who retire with large and adequate balances, and I think it's important for the government to actually put these policy things in place now, because it'll be so much harder to convince people that they should convert large lump sums to income streams if we wait 20 years' time and we have a lot of people retiring with over $500,000. So we have to have buy-in from the government to reach the finish line. But we also have to have buy-in from the superannuation funds and the financial services industry. Now, we have to make sure that products are actually developed to enable people to get to the finish line. Currently, we have a very small menu of retirement income products. A lot of this is driven by the fact that there's regulations which prevent a nice sort of interesting suite of retirement products. But I think it's important now for industry and financial services providers who design these products getting together and thinking, how can we actually design products for the mass market, not just for high net worth individuals, but for the bulk of superannuation members who'll be coming through the superannuation system over the next 10 or 20 years and actually retiring with large accumulations. Finally, we've got to get the fund members themselves on side. Now, I guess if you ask the Treasury, they would probably tell you fund members aren't interested in longevity products. Now, if you look at the annuity sales figures, just about nobody buys an annuity. I think last year there was probably 120 life annuities sold in the country. But I think we have to be very wary when we just dismiss consumer interest in annuity. In the work that I do at the university, we actually do a lot of consumer surveys, and what we're interested in is people's retirement planning, people's knowledge of products, people's understandings of the risks that they might face, and we often set up scenarios and little experiments asking people what sort of insurance they would like or what sort of products they would like without telling them the names of the products. And what we find is that on the whole, people have very low knowledge of retirement income products. If we ask people about their awareness of life annuities or account-based pensions, we've run a number of surveys, and usually less than half of our subjects, which are superannuation fund members approaching retirement in their 50s, about half of them have never heard of an account-based or allocated pension. About a third of them, only about a third of them have ever heard of an annuity. And when we drill down and ask them what sort of risks do these products address, we find that hardly anybody understands that an annuity, actually a life annuity, will give them an income for life, or that it will give them a guaranteed income. we find that many people think that an account-based pension gives them an income for life and gives them a guaranteed income. So there's a lot of member misunderstanding of these products, and I think it's too dismissive to say that people don't want these products because people don't understand what they are. People also don't understand that the risks they might face in terms of stock market crashes or living too long. So we've recently run a number of surveys trying to work out people's subjective life expectancy. So how long do people think they might live? And when we compare this with the improved life tables, we find that many, many people underestimate how long they live. So a figure that comes to mind, I was actually at a student seminar yesterday when one of our students presented this work. And on average, 58-year-old men underestimate their life expectancy by 10 years. So, it's not a wonder that superannuation fund members don't understand the importance of life products if they actually don't realise how long they're going to live. Okay, so overall, I think that our finish line is a lot further along than just retiring with a good accumulation. But to actually reach that finish line, we need buy-in from all the relevant parties. We need the government to articulate a proper retirement income policy. We need the superannuation funds and industry to get together and design appropriate products for the mass market, which are reasonably cheap, because we know that we know insurance is expensive and these products can be expensive. But we also need to involve the fund members themselves and educate them along the way of the importance of their retirement savings actually lasting until the finish line. Okay, thank you.